Star Wars, in large part, has always been about the merchandise. I bet you can't think about Star Wars without also thinking about all that lovely merch. After all, it was Lucas & Co., due to the success of the 77 film, who single-handedly kick-started the modern symbiotic relationship between the blockbuster movie and licensed products. Now, if something can be linked, however tenuous, to a successful movie franchise, or come to think of it, an unsuccessful one, and generate a revenue stream, someone is going to do it. It's now difficult to remember a time when movies of a particular type didn't come with toys, games, or Happy Meals. However, despite the huge success of the original trilogy, it needs to be remembered that by the mid-1980s, the Star Wars franchise was considered by many to be dead. If you were a fan of limited means, as I was, it was slim pickings. There were still a few model kits available, along with a handful of novels and comics, but most significantly, Kenner had stopped making the now famous 4-inch action figure in 1985. However, some were of the Mark Twain persuasion and thought reports of its death were greatly exaggerated. As mentioned in a previous video, West End Games produced the Star Wars role-playing game in 1987. They believed Star Wars still had legs in RPG form, even if Lucas had no plans for any new movies, and they guessed the gaming fanbase was still large enough to support such an endeavour. It's worth mentioning again that the subsequent game established pretty much all of the background of what later became the Star Wars expanded universe, as well as fleshing out all 3 of the original movies. If it didn't have a name or a background story, it got one. So authoritative did Lucasfilm consider the material West End Games created. When Timothy Zahn was hired to write what now became the famous Thrawn trilogy, he was sent a set of the RPG books and told to use them as background material. But it wasn't just the RPG West End Games wanted to give the Star Wars treatment to. The same year they released the first board game based on the original movies called Star Warriors. 3 others were to follow, with the last one, Escape from the Death Star, being released in 1990. My favourite of the 4 is Assault on Hoth, The Empire Strikes Back, released in 1988. Best described as a straightforward hex and counter war game, it recreates the iconic 8 minutes of the second movie where the Imperials attack Echo Base. I'd argue it's the best of the bunch too. Anyone who has purchased one of Fantasy Flight's current Star Wars board games and hasn't seen one of these older ones is in for a bit of a shock. You need to bear in mind this, in production terms, is from another era. The map is paper, not card mounted, and depending on where you are aesthetically, functional rather than beautiful, although of course function has a beauty all of its own. It shows the ice field with Echo Base at one end and the Imperial landing zone at the other. Down each side are the areas where players record damage, view vehicle and troop stats, and if you're the rebels, track Luke's ability to use the Force. There are 3 types of card which control the flow of the game. When it was new, they came, as I recall, on a single sheet. Each card had perforated edges, which you needed to separate yourself. This seems archaic by modern standards, and to be fair, it was even then. They aren't that resilient, not having any kind of lamination or finish found in even the most basic game today. The quality of card and paper means it can suffer from yellowing, but as long as the contents have spent most of their time in the box and dry, it shouldn't be too bad. The units are small card counters inserted into smaller plastic stands. Again, low rent, but functional. There's heavy and light troopers for both Rebels and Imperial forces. The Rebels also get laser towers in the Imperial's AT-STs. More importantly, there's Rebel snowspeeders and the Imperial walkers. To keep track of damage on the map sheet, there are these tiny markers. They're a common element of hex-based wargames of the period and found in all 4 of West End Games' Star Wars box titles. They're easy to lose, and anyone without 20/20 vision is going to need some form of magnification to read what they say. Lastly, and somewhat uniquely, or it was at the time, there are these 8 custom fire dice, which you use to determine if you hit stuff. If you're playing the Empire, you want to roll Vader symbols. The Rebels, obviously lightsaber symbols. The 2 small-sided dice are used to determine what damage happens to walkers or speeders after they've been hit. If you're still here, I don't need to tell you what each player's objectives are, but just in case. The Imperial player has to destroy the shield generator, protecting Echo Base. The Rebel player needs to get the transports away. in this case 5, or wipe out all of the Imperial forces on the map. Gameplay is straightforward. Cards are divided into two main types. Action cards are the heart of the game and drive the action. Players take turns to reveal action cards, and relevant players carry out the action described. This means that sometimes you turn over a card that helps your opponent, and vice versa. These are usually instructions for a unit to move or fire, but sometimes they tell you to reveal an event card, which are a series of events, which could be one of the transports escaping or the arrival of reinforcements. The third type of card, of which there is only one, the hero card, which in this case is Guess Who, is allocated secretly to a particular snowspeeder. Oddly, the picture on the card back is from Return of the Jedi. It gets odder because the later Battle of Endor, which uses the same game mechanic, also uses the identical artwork on the back of the cards. It seems like an odd cost-cutting exercise. West End Games were eventually to file for bankruptcy, but that wasn't for another 10 years. The cards, as some of you might already have guessed, make the gameplay rather more random than most board gamers are used to, and yes, if you're the kind of gamer who wants to constantly crush your opponents due to your superior tactical ability and in-depth knowledge of the rules, this is not your cup of Earl Grey. The mechanics specifically try to keep things on a knife edge for as long as possible. The random card shuffle will rarely throw up oddities like the transports all escaping in the first half dozen turns, or none getting away before the rebels are crushed between the metallic feet of the Imperial walkers. So is it worth trying to find a copy? Well, that depends. If you like the theme, board games, age notwithstanding, it will probably appeal. If you can't get past the old school components, that to be fair were only average in 1988, the random gameplay, limited regular playability and the lack of a like-minded opponent, you'll pass. You play this game for the stories you get to tell each other about how your version of one of the opening scenes of The Empire Strikes Back turned out a bit differently. For that reason alone, this simple, admittedly niche, improbably clever 34-year-old piece of gaming nostalgia is a keeper, all but one that could really benefit from a modern makeover. One interesting aside is what we now know as 8080s aren't referred to anywhere as such in the game rules, the map, or the playing pieces. In fact, fact fans, they were never referred to as 8080s in either The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. The term all-terrain armoured transport appears to have been first used by Kenner when they produced a toy version of the Walker in 1980, and it stuck. It would appear then that West End Games followed the movie naming convention rather than the toys. Now, as General Veers himself said,
"Yes, Lord Vader. I've reached the main power generators. The shield will be down in moments. You may start your landing."